One freezing morning, a retired war veteran opened his cabin door and froze. Three German shepherds sat in the snow, shivering, starving, their eyes begging for help. What he did next left everyone shocked. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The forest groaned under the weight of winter, each pine tree draped in heavy snow. In a small wooden cabin at the edge of the wilderness lived Walter, an old man whose world had shrunk to the rhythm of chopping wood, boiling water, and fighting the cold. Silence was his only companion. Each morning began the same way. Walter would wake to the creak of floorboards and the faint crackle of the dying fire. He would wrap himself in layers, his breath visible in the icy air. His hands, worn and calloused, clutched an axe as he trudged outside to split logs, his lifeline against the unforgiving chill. Life in isolation had hardened him, but it had also left him hollow. The winters felt longer with each passing year, the nights colder and lonelier. Sometimes he wondered if anyone even remembered he was still alive out here, hidden in the white wilderness. Yet despite the solitude, there was a quiet dignity. In his survival, Walter had learned to live with little, to endure storms, and to find meaning in endurance itself. But on this particular morning, as he stepped out into the frozen silence, something awaited him that would shatter his routine forever and awaken a part of his heart he thought long dead. Walter's boots crunched against the frozen ground as he carried an armful of firewood toward the cabin. The air was biting, sharp enough to sting his lungs. He paused to catch his breath, and that's when he noticed it, a faint sound, almost swallowed by the wind. A whimper. He froze, listening harder. The sound came again, weaker this time, followed by another. Walter turned his head toward the tree line, and what he saw made him drop the firewood from his arms. Three German shepherds sat huddled together in the snow, their bodies trembling violently, their breath rising in faint white clouds. They weren't strays. Their thick collars and sturdy builds spoke clearly. They were trained K9s, once strong and proud, now reduced to shivering shadows. Their ribs pressed against thin fur, and frost clung to their whiskers. Their amber eyes locked onto him, pleading silently for help. Walter's heart thudded in his chest. How had they ended up here, miles from the nearest town? Questions raced through his mind, but the sight of their fragile bodies drowned everything out. They weren't just cold. They were on the edge of death. For a long moment, man and dog stared at each other, the only sound the whisper of the wind. Then one of the shepherds whimpered again, lowering its head to the snow as if surrendering. Walter's breath caught. This was no accident. They had come to his cabin, begging for a miracle. Walter's first instinct was to rush forward, but his body stiffened in hesitation. His cabin barely held enough supplies for one man, let alone 3 starving dogs. Food was scarce, firewood dwindled, and he himself was just a heartbeat away from being swallowed by winter's cruelty. Could he afford this risk? The dogs whimpered again, their voices soft but urgent, and his chest ached at the sound. He turned away, muttering under his breath, "They'll drain me dry. I can't." But even as he tried to harden his resolve, his steps faltered. He saw in their eyes not just desperation, but trust. They had chosen him. Memories surfaced, unbidden and sharp. He remembered his younger days, when loyalty and courage defined his life, when he too had worn a uniform and served alongside loyal companions. He had always believed that a man's worth was measured not by what he kept, but by what he gave. Walter clenched his jaw, the decision weighing like a stone in his chest. Survival demanded indifference, but humanity demanded compassion. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he pulled the blanket from his shoulders and stepped toward them. "All right then," he whispered, voice trembling. "If you came to me for help, you'll have it." Walter shuffled back toward the cabin, his arms cradling the weight of survival and compassion all at once. The dogs followed hesitantly, their paws dragging through the snow, leaving faint trails of weakness behind them. Each step they took seemed like a battle they were barely winning. Inside, the cabin glowed faintly from the fire he had managed to keep alive. Walter quickly spread blankets across the floor, motioning the dogs to settle. Their bodies collapsed almost instantly, curling against each other for warmth. The sight tightened his throat. Creatures built for strength reduced to fragile shells. He rummaged through his pantry, pulling out what little he had: dried meat, a crust of bread, and melted snow he'd collected earlier. Breaking the meat into small pieces, he offered it carefully. The dogs devoured it hungrily, their ribs straining with each desperate bite. As the fire crackled, warmth seeped into their trembling bodies. One by one, their breathing steadied, and their eyes, once dull with despair, began to flicker with faint sparks of life. Walter watched silently, a strange feeling creeping into his chest. Companionship, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. That night, as the wind howled outside, Walter lay awake on his cot, listening to the steady breaths of the dogs sleeping. Near the fire, for the first time in a long while, the cabin didn't feel empty. But with comfort came unease. Where had these K9s come from, and why were they abandoned? Morning came quietly, the storm easing into a pale gray sky. Walter stepped outside to fetch more firewood, but distant figures moving through the trees caught his eye. At first, he thought it was hunters. Then the glint of badges and the sight of uniforms told a different story: police officers. They approached cautiously, their boots crunching in the snow, radios crackling at their sides. One of them spotted the German shepherds resting by the fire through the cabin window. Relief spread across their faces instantly. "We've been searching everywhere," one officer said breathlessly. "These K9s disappeared during last week's blizzard. We thought we'd lost them forever." Walter's heart sank and lifted all at once. The dogs hadn't simply wandered. They had been soldiers left behind in a storm. Their survival wasn't chance. It was instinct that led them here. He looked back at them, lying peacefully inside, and realized fate had placed them in his path. The officers explained how the unit had been separated from their handlers during a mountain search operation. Despite desperate efforts, the storm forced the team to retreat, believing the dogs had perished. Yet, through freezing nights and endless snow, the K9s had fought their way to his cabin. Walter listened quietly, a storm of emotions swirling in his chest. The officers stepped inside, their voices softening as they called to the K9s. But the dogs didn't move. Instead, they stayed pressed close to Walter, their heads lifting only to glance between him and the strangers in uniform. Their loyalty had shifted, born from the night he saved them. One officer knelt, extending a hand. "Come on, boys," he urged gently. Yet the shepherds only lowered their ears and pressed tighter against Walter's legs. The old man felt their trembling bodies lean into him, as though begging him not to let go. His throat tightened painfully. Walter looked at the officers, torn. "They've been through enough," he whispered. "Out there, they would have frozen if not for this cabin. Maybe they're alive for a reason." His voice cracked, a plea hidden beneath the words. He had found more than survival. He had found family. The silence stretched until the senior officer finally nodded. "They'll always be part of our unit," he said. "But maybe their mission now is here, with you." Relief washed over Walter, tears burning his eyes. He reached down, running his hands through thick fur warmed by the fire. That night, the cabin wasn't silent anymore. The shepherd slept peacefully by his side, and for the first time in decades, Walter didn't feel alone. His world, once defined by solitude, had been rewritten by loyalty and love. The freezing K9s hadn't just found rescue. They had given him a reason to live again.